We didn't know how much interest there would be, but really like literally right from the start, we had one player go and then there probably were like 20 other players.
The good part about that though was that like people were liking it though.
Oh yeah, people loved it.
That's just a really fun prompt, I think. Like not one that you would ever really imagine would come up.
They were like egging their teammate on and we had a whole crowd, like everyone was watching, but it definitely made for a great reel.
I love pushing brands to do some stuff that aren't like just corporate brand book stuff.
And I have never laughed harder on a set than I did with this one. Like it was...
Hello and welcome to Final, your exclusive behind-the-scenes look at just what goes into running a modern media agency. I'm your host, Connor Aidan, and recently Fresh Tape Media was at the College Football Championships on not one, but two shoots. So today we're going to hear from the 5 Fresh Tapers that made that happen, all about those two shoots, starting with, of course, our head of production, Avalon Koenig. Avalon, how are you doing today?
I am well.
That's awesome. So I understand you were kind of the lead on the Meta project. So when Meta approached us, what were they kind of looking for?
I guess we had pitched something in the past about threads thrown. They're really trying to push threads.
Mm-hmm.
And so Nick, when he came to us, he actually already knew that he wanted to make this come to life at this event. So he's like, thread thrown, like, can you just like go deep? Like, what is that?
Yeah.
What does it look like? But threads thrown, go. So that's kind of what we had. So that he already kind of had that idea in mind. And so then we took it back and we obviously then, you know, like what would they do on the threads thrown?
Mm-hmm.
What would it look like? What would the deliverables look like? And so we pitched a bunch of ideas, you know, that could go with that. And then Meta picked 2 concepts that they liked and we actually did both. So we would kind of flip-flop per player. And then Audrey and the design team designed the throne based on like some samples that like Meta had liked and things we'd seen. And then we kind of just made it come to life from there.
Yeah, what were those concepts when it came to like the actual content?
So the final ones was my very first thread, and the other one was royal reactions. So my very first thread is kind of self-explanatory. If somebody was not on threads, like we asked them at the event, are you on threads? Do you know what threads is? And sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. Even sometimes they were and they hadn't threaded yet. And so on the throne, the concept was they would do their very first thread. But we actually also had, as part of that, this custom at ball, 8 ball, but it was an at ball because it has the at on it, custom. And we had all these questions that were also customized. So they would like, so for a prompt, because, you know, you're sitting there and you're like, what's my very first? I don't know. What's my thread? And so they would shake the ball, look at the question and be like, what artist amps you up right now? So it'd be like, oh, like, you know, Drake amps me up right now. And then they would, on threads thrown, type out and post their very first thread. And then we'd put it together. So that was my very first thread. Royal reactions was if they already had a threads account or they've threaded before, they obviously are not going to do my very first thread. So we had a whole list of questions that were very specific, like when I catch, you know, a Hail Mary pass, or like when I hold, a lot of people chose like when I hold the CFP trophy.
Yeah.
So like, it's like, you know, that's the prompt. And then we would give them a phone in threads and they'd pick a meme that like, or a GIF basically that would describe that feeling. So like, you know, they type in like excited, find like an excited, you know, like, like dancing meme, and they'd show it to the camera. And that was
cute. Yeah.
Reactions.
And taking it back just a little bit. So you have this idea that's been cooking in the past, this throne. How does it go from like idea to actual reality?
The first step for us was to make a mock, you know, that like just put something to paper of like, what does this look like? And that's obviously design, and Audrey's job is to kind of like put something to paper. Again, we had a couple examples that we liked, you know, we're like tall. We wanted these elements that are a part of it. It needs to be black and white. That was another thing. Like, well, we pitched too. We were like black and white, or do you want some of that rainbow elements they have in threads too? It needs to look very thready. So like, where could we put threads? And so the design team basically came up with the concept of like having the back of the chair like look like that thread. Or I think actually the first round did not have that. And then like Alana, our creative director, was like, oh, it'd be cool to add some more elements that look like threads, not just a throne, but that this is like very custom threads thrown. But it's really just putting like pencil to paper and coming up with something to then work from
Was it
there.
a lot of back and forth with Meta themselves?
Yes, that one was a lot. I think their creative director, somebody hopped in the thread too with like some more guidance for us because we didn't have their brand guidelines. So we kind of just went off of what we could find online and like the Threads app and just like taking stuff from there. And so they were really helpful coming in and be like, oh, actually, like this is not as threadsy as this. So like, let's lean here and like, let's lean here. And the design team would just like V2, V3, V4. I don't know how many Vs we went, but there were quite a bit of back and forth, which was great because it was helpful to get that insight to make it, because they want to use this too from not just here, but like hopefully either put it in their offices in LA or like bring it to other events. So like we knew this is not a one-off, like it needs to be perfect. Every production needs to be perfect, but like something that really is threadsy so that they feel like they can take it to other places and not, it doesn't just live at CFP.
Gotcha. So now this throne exists. How are you and it getting to Houston?
So Audrey, our production designer, does an amazing job of finding vendors in location. So the people who built this throne are in Houston.
Gotcha.
So we obviously fly there and we'll meet them. So like they were actually there before we even landed and they had like built the thing by the time we showed up. We're like, wow, that was easy.
Nice.
And that's typically what we do is we find people in those cities just, so we're not shipping huge elements of a set design because we also had like a wall and a floor to kind of bring the set together. So it was built there and now it's being stored there and eventually we'll ship it either to LA or to us to store or something like that. But it's just the fabricator that are in.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more about setup. Like what is it like when you arrive? Like how is that whole process going down?
Yeah, we arrived, we like to arrive early. So we all got up at 2:30 in the morning.
Nice.
It was lovely. We got on a 5 a.m. flight to Houston, but it was great because then you land at like 9:30 and we meet. It depends. Oftentimes it's just fresh tape and you're just there to like supervise the set build.
Yeah.
But we also had both of our sets, the ESPN set and the Meta set. We had a couple of our staff from the next day, like our DPs, especially, and like my second camera person come so we could set up the lights and get a test done. Like you wouldn't have audio, you wouldn't have all the elements, but like, so we'd feel good and we don't have to come in as early the next day. We were there, the sets got built. We did some prep work and then like at, 1 o'clock, my DP and the videographer came in. We loaded all the lights in, I helped them wherever they need to set up too as an extra hand, but basically like they set up the lights where they want. We set up cameras, we do a test. I like pumped out a edit just to like see if it would work and like what it looked like. Cause we also, Katie and Brandon made graphics, motion graphics. So I had to make sure that they fit. And like I had some notes. I was like, oh, actually, Katie, can you fix these things? So she's, here in Denver, she's fixing motion graphics while I'm in Houston, like testing the kind of the flow out. And so she had new graphics made by the end of the day. And so basically before we leave set that night, we know we're good to go. Like we're approved. I've sent it to the client. I've sent it to Alana, the creative director. I've sent it to AJ, our DP. So everybody has an eye in, they have changes. Hey, change that color, change this. How about we move this down a little bit? I mean, there's like, 5 cooks in the kitchen from all over the country weighing in. And then we get it to a place we feel good. And we're like, all right, lights off, cameras off. See you tomorrow. And that's pretty typical for a setup day.
Awesome. And let's get some names in there too. So like who all was there helping you out?
Yeah. So on my set, our DP was Joel. Our BCam was Kirby. We had James, our audio tech. We had Bianca, who I actually went to school with at San Diego. Nice. Shout out Toreros.
Shout out.
She's in Houston now. So she was our PA and she did some photography for us too. We had Jay and Manny, who are our real-time editors. And then obviously we had our Meta staff, which was Sydney and Nick and Will. And they kind of tag team, like, pulling people, but also onboarding them to Threads on the day of, and just making sure everything's like running smoothly.
Yeah. And since like that real time element was such like a big part of it, how was the flow with like the average person like working?
Yeah, it's quite real-time editing is quite a haul. Yeah. It's very different than like your typical production where you just are like dropping footage, you just DIT, and like worry about it later. It's a sprint. I actually edited too because it was just like too much. Yeah. We also weren't sure how many guys we'd get. We're like, are we going to get 8 guys? Or are we going to get like how many people will come through? you have an hour with each team and they just sit on bleachers. And so like I literally just walked around and was like, hey, anybody want to come sit on the meta thread? And you get like groups of 3, groups of 4, like one guy here, one guy here. So we got 19 people per team. And our deliverables were like 4 compilations, 1 per team per concept, plus individual ones like standouts. And that's a lot, especially when
that's
like
crazy.
And we're also working within 8-hour days. Like you have contracts to also, to uphold. So like if your editors get there at 8 a.m., you only have till 3, I think, right?
And it wasn't, of course, day of the game. It was like what, the Saturday or Sunday before?
Yeah, it was the Friday before. So Friday, it's their media day. But yeah, if people get there, but then the footage just starts coming in, at 10, and then it's done by, I think it was 12. You've got 4 hours to turn these around, and there's graphics, there's, Mogerts where you have to fill in the blank, like looking up names, double checking spelling, like what's their position. So there's like a lot more than just putting a couple things together and then finding the best pieces. So you're going through 19, our editors, we had 2 of them, but they're going through 19 guys to find the best moments. That takes a lot of time. That alone takes like 2 hours, not even including the edit, plus sound, music. I mean, all these little things that like, and that's what I'm there for too, is to like check this stuff and be like, well, no, this graphic needs to go a little bit because this is not how it's designed here. Or like, and so I jumped in to like help with compilations because we're like getting close to like their cut time, I'm like, So it's a sprint. Like we were working, really it was 7 a.m. I think is when everybody showed up, like 7 a.m. to 4 nonstop. And you're like, kind of sprinting, talking, directing, editing, taking photos, taking BTS,
it seems like
everybody
beast.
else wants photos too. So people are coming in, you're like, yeah, hop in, let me take your phone. Like it is just, you go. And then you cut.
Yeah. But I guess the good part about that though was that like people were liking it though.
Oh yeah. People loved it. I mean, we got 7 influencers, I think, or not influencer, like media people. I edited those on the plane because I was like, I don't think we can do this in time, but I'll do it later. But yeah, people loved it. I mean, people like the look of it. People love the photos. It was a huge hit.
And of course I have to ask you, like, what was your favorite part?
Well, so one of my first events at Fresh Tape was CFP in 2018, I believe, or 2019. I think 2019. And I haven't been back since then. And like, I don't often go, I haven't been to like the real time editing events with like video and like motion graphics. I haven't done in a while. So it was like kind of fun to be back. Like I was like, whoa, this feels like 2018. Like it was a nice like throwback, and the sprint is fun too. I was telling this to Audrey on the way home, but like I was just at Winter Classic, which was pretty like I kind of didn't, I'm just supervisor. Like I don't really do I'm just supervising things, and you're kind of just chilling. And sometimes you're like, I wish I had more to do. Like, can I help? Like, is there anything to do? And so it's nice sometimes to have those shoots. And then it's nice sometimes to have shoots like this where you're like going for 20 hours and you're like, wow. And then at the end, you're like, wow, good job. That was good. That was satisfying. So it's just kind of the chaos of it. And the like, obviously success of it is really rewarding.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about it.
You're welcome.
No worries. And of course, that wasn't our only project. So next up, we're going to hear from our senior producer, Regan Alsup. And we're back. And joining me is senior producer Regan Alsup. Regan, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah. And of course, for the college football championship, we had not only one shoot, but another with ESPN. So Regan, tell me kind of what was ESPN looking for? Like, what did they approach Fresh Tape wanting?
Yeah, they were looking for just kind of a fun social moment. They had a spot set aside as part of the broader college football playoff championship media day, and wanted just to kind of do something fun that would get the guys over. There's a lot of sort of competing attention for different players. And so, yeah, just wanted to create a booth that would be something fun that the guys wanted to participate in, that would live on their social channels. It was primarily meant for social channels. So.
Awesome. Yeah. And that initial brainstorm process, because I've looked through a few of the decks as well. What ultimately led you to settle on this like mystery box idea? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we settled on this mystery box concept, just working with ESPN, trying to figure out kind of based on the availability and the kind of flow of the day, what would work best, and what also would kind of really land and be funny and just be kind of playful for their social channels. And so we whittled it down. I think the original deck we sent probably had like 10 or 12 different concepts, and we whittled it down to, I think 3 to 4, and ultimately mystery box for a bunch of different reasons just made the most sense. And for me, I think it's one of the things that I just like can always watch a mystery box video and always crack up. And so I was really excited that they landed on that, because I think it's just such a fun and silly, goofy thing. Some of the funniest things for us in the shoot was that our set drew a lot of attention from the players and from their teammates. And so players would be putting their hands in the box, and it would be something goofy like the Huskies mascot, and their teammates would be sort of psyching them out and working them up. So that was like, it was really fun that we, like, most of the time we probably had 15 to 20 other players watching in. So that kind of like added to the intensity of it.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So you arrive in Houston, like what are the steps to get you from there to finish set?
So we had a day to set up, which was really clutch. It was nice to be able to kind of show up, get the lay of the land. It was at the Houston Convention Center, and the media day, the space is shared by a lot of different people. So, we were doing our other activation with Meta. CFP itself had a location or a sort of a spot set up. There's a bunch of different booths for players and fans. There's on the other side of the convention center, there was like a fan zone. And so fans could come and watch different players and the like it's essentially like a huge press conference. But having that ability to set up the day before was really awesome, because it just like, we could test everything out. We could set the lighting. We could make sure everything looked good, so that we were just ready to go when the players sort of started to arrive the next day. So so we spent about half a day setting up on Friday, the day before the media day, and then Saturday morning got there a couple hours in advance, just kind of pre-tested everything, make sure everything was still running smoothly. And then we had about an hour with each team, but that was split across all of the different media activities. And so essentially a team showed up, they had an hour on the floor, and that might be some of their players doing the press conference, coaches doing the press conference. There were a lot of like other media outlets, influencers, et cetera, gathering content kind of all throughout with various team members. But then we were very lucky that players were sort of naturally drawn to our booth. It's like, you see the box, you kind of see other people doing
exciting.
It. Yeah. So we players just kind of naturally came over, and like I said, we had a crowd kind of around the box at any time, which made it just really fun. We had a couple of different, very important, aspects kind of that helped bring it together. ESPN was super helpful. All of our contacts at ESPN were there. They helped us kind of coordinate the whole thing through college football playoffs, just making sure that what we were putting in the box was approved and everything like that. And then day of, helping also to make sure we had players. The other sort of super important piece to it that I think made it the finished product that it was is that ESPN had brought on an influencer, Andrew Spencer, and he acted as a bit of a host. And so he was there getting the guys kind of to come, and then also like egging them on or sort of psyching them out, and kind of, asking funny questions. Like, they would ask if they needed to put both hands in, and he's like, whichever hand you're like willing to sacrifice, like things like that kind of like get them, kind of psyched out a little bit, which was funny. And then, so Audrey, our production designer, was part of crew. And then Alex, who was our director of photography, he was awesome. Just kind of in setup and making sure everything looked great. And we all kind of worked together on the flow, which was great. And our guy JR on sound was awesome. So that kind of like lit up the crew.
And so we talked a little bit about the players coming up, but when you get to the actual media day, what was kind of like the flow of that whole day? Like, you talked about having an hour with the team. Like, how did that work?
Yeah, so there were a lot of different sort of stations and a lot of different things going on with that media day. So there were maybe 8 different boxes where some of the more prominent players and coaches and everything like that were stationed. And you had different like press and cameras and whatnot surrounding each of those boxes, asking questions in sort of a more traditional press conference style. And that was broadcast up on a television. Fans were in the audience kind of looking and listening in to their favorite players. And then on the floor, there were bleachers where they had each of the different positions of the team. So it'd be like the offensive line, defensive line, like different, had kind of like broken them up because football teams are very large. There's a lot of players on them. So they had essentially like bleachers set up where the guys were sitting, and different press outlets, influencers, et cetera, different kind of content creators and capturers could go up and pull different players, ask them different questions. And then you had our booth, the college football playoffs had a booth, Meta had a booth. And the flow was in some ways it was kind of a free for all, like unless the players were up in one of the kind of 8 booths, they were just kind of like people were milling about the floor. And the players were, for the most part, could kind of go wherever they wanted or wherever they needed to be. And so, they would just kind of like cycle through slowly from our box. And I think the cool thing was we didn't know how much interest there would be. Yeah. But really, like literally right from the start, we had one player go, and then there probably were like 20 other players around, and they all kind of like wanted to cycle through and go. So it was awesome. A cool flow. And so we had each of the teams were on the floor for an hour.
Cool. And was this like a live edit situation, or how was like the handoff of deliverables?
Yeah, it was a sort of a live edit. Gotcha. Sort of a real-time edit. So essentially ESPN needed the finished product by the next day. And so Alex, our director of photography, he doubled as our editor. Nice. And so essentially we wrapped around midday with the shoot, broke everything down, and then they had a little media workroom for us to set up shop and just roll through the edit. ESPN had been super helpful and had pulled some audio or some music clips for us to kind of have a chance to understand the tone of the video ahead of time. And as soon as we wrapped, we essentially just set up shop and started rolling with things. So we had actually finished the video that evening, and then they posted it the next morning.
And throughout the whole process, kind of what was your favorite part?
A lot of times my favorite part of shoots is when we actually get into the shooting part, because there's so much anticipation, and there's so many variables, and you're like, I feel like I've done everything I can to make this go as smoothly as possible, but you don't really know until you get into the actual moment of the shoot. And so for me, the best moment and the kind of sigh of relief moment was when players started showing up and were really having fun with it. And I have never laughed harder on a set than I did with this one. Like it was funny in the moment. It's funny in the edit. Like, the guys were having so much fun with it. Andrew was drawing out really great reactions from different people. And oh my gosh, it just like everyone could not stop laughing. It was so fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me to talk about it. We will hear more from Regan in a little bit, but now we're going to throw it over to Audrey Alex, our production designer. Welcome back. And joining me now is our production designer, Audrey Alex. Audrey, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
I know that you worked on both our ESPN and Meta projects. So can you talk a little bit about, just briefly your involvement with both? Like what were you brought on to do?
Yeah, so I am the production designer. So I mainly work with set and props and managing the fabrication and any of those details. So with Meta, in particular, I managed the fabricator. I basically kind of spoke with them and kind of voiced my opinions on material types and what our intended look was. And so I kind of guided them to our final result. And then for ESPN, I also dealt with the set. So sourcing and finding the curtains for the backdrop as well as all of the mystery items. And then I was in charge of fabricating the box for this mystery box concept. And this one was a little funny because we didn't have money for an actual fabricator. So my dad ended up making the box, and then I painted it and I decaled it and did all the finishing touches on it.
Nice. Yeah, let's break down each of those a little bit. So starting with Meta, what is it? Just curious, what does it actually mean to work with a fabricator? What are you actually doing in that relationship? Yeah,
so you kind of bring them on, and I find that you really have to know your stuff in terms of how things are constructed, the materials, the screw types. So talking the language of a fabricator really says a lot when you're trying to get them to work for you. So I have to know a lot of all of that stuff, and then it makes the conversation go a lot easier. So for Meta, we basically came to them with a concept. So we had our renderings, and then we kind of had a discussion on, okay, this is going to be this material. This is going to be clear acrylic. This is going to be milk acrylic. This is going to be dye bond, or this is going to be whatever it is. And then from there, we work with them on a budget, make sure we're aligned for the whole project, and then kind of keep tabs on them throughout the process to make sure all the load-in information is communicated, and then overseeing install on the day of the shoot. Nice.
And then shifting over to ESPN, because I know for that one you were super literally hands-on involved with. What was it like with that whole mystery box situation and having to create it yourself?
I ended up going home for Christmas, and I happened to be there with my dad, and he has a wood shop, which I think I could have definitely built the box myself, but I don't have a garage. I don't have any tools that I can, a table saw. I don't have that. So he was able to build me the box, and then I ended up taking it back with me in this huge Home Depot box on the plane. And then when I got here, I, sanded it, painted it, added a decal, added kind of this fabric element to hide the holes, so you could see the objects inside. And then we put it on another plane back to Houston, and had a really good showing for the event itself. But we, had a lot of different materials and food and items that we brought in with a undescript box that we kind of put in our box that we made, and then to hide them from the players. And then they were definitely surprised by what they found.
Yeah. For our audio only listeners, can you kind of describe briefly what is the mystery box? What's that whole kind of concept?
So I'm sure you've seen it. It's not a new concept. Jimmy Fallon has a skit for it. Vanity Fair, I think, also does. Basically, it's a box with one side open for the audience to see, and then the guests are sitting on the opposite side, and they stick their hands in on both sides of this box. And so the audience can see what they're touching, but not the person who's touching it.
Yeah.
And so we put in some funky elements like a wet sponge or a fake snake, or we put in Jell-O. We put in cooked spaghetti with sauce and beans. So just some really weird items that are very sensory oriented, and just kind of weird to stick your hand in, touch without being able to see it.
Yeah. So what, did you just fly to Houston with it on your lap, or how did that whole go?
Luckily we checked it. You could check a box. It comes in oversized luggage, so don't be staring at the carousel when you're trying to pick it up. It's in a different location.
Yeah.
But we brought it to on set, and then touched it up a little bit. Had a little gaff repair after it falling a couple times off my suitcase. But it looked great on camera. So that's all we care about.
When you're in Houston, what then becomes your role there?
So once I'm on site, I obviously oversee fabrication, but if there is no fabrication, I set up the set. So I helped set up the curtains as well as the box. I pinned kind of the tablecloth that we use to cover this table to hold the box, making sure everything looks good on camera. And then I prepped all of the ingredients and food for the actual mystery box behind the scenes. And then it was my job to kind of bring them out each turn for a new player, and kind of put them away while Regan did her directing.
Nice. And then for the throne as well, were you there for the setup? I was there for the setup. The fabrication team was amazing and
really didn't need any assistance from me. So that's a nice perk when you find a good team. I basically just kind of watched and directed and told them where to put things. Other than that, that was kind of my involvement on Meta on site because the ESPN shoot took a lot more time and a lot more of my energy.
And what was it like kind of going back to the mystery box, like seeing the players' reactions? Because I saw a few clips from it and some of them were kind of crazy.
I was really surprised that people actually thought it was a real snake, and like the whole team that was watching thought it was a fake snake, and they were like egging their teammate on, and we had a whole crowd, like everyone was watching, and I think they were also egging it on a little bit, which was fun to watch, but it definitely made for a great reel. But there were very real reactions in that clip that we posted.
Dang, it's so fun seeing like just gigantic buff people just like squealing.
They're little laughs. But it's funny because I mean, all these buff football players, like you have to remember they're in college. They're young, and it's like once you see them in person, you're like, oh my gosh, these are real people too. So
nice. Well, what was your favorite part of the whole experience?
My favorite part was kind of being in this college football playoff atmosphere. Everyone was so hyped to be in Houston. Like all the hotels were decked out with, CFP merch and gear and graphics and whatnot. And then being there on media day, like everyone was just so happy to be there and be a part of such a cool event. And so I was also happy to be a part of that.
Nice. Thank you so much for joining me today, Audrey.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Now it is design time. So next up, we're going to be meeting with our amazing design department, starting with Brandon. And joining me now is our art director, Brandon Messner. Brandon, how are you doing?
I'm doing swell. How are you?
Great. So we've talked a bit already about this Meta throne with Avalon and Audrey, but I would love to hear kind of from your perspective, because I know you worked on the throne a bit. Like, what was that whole process like from a design perspective?
From a design perspective, yeah. By the time I got involved, we knew that we were making a throne, an actual object for people to sit in. And I think the only part of the brief that was pertinent to me was that it's Threads branded. So Threads branding is very monochrome. It's really just bands that say threads over and over again, which is great. I think it speaks to the infinite aspect of social media and just putting your text on.
Did they give you kind of a brand guidelines, or because I know Threads is so new?
It's so new. I never saw a brand guideline. The brand guideline for this project was Googling Threads branding and then hitting images and going, okay, that's it. And luckily, I'm very good at Adobe Illustrator and know that if you draw a curve and then you double click that tool, there's a type on path tool. And the letters will just follow the bands wherever they go. So the world was my oyster as far as how the words would move.
Yeah. And for our audio only listeners, kind of what did those first iterations kind of look like of the Threads throne?
Well, audio only listeners, the Threads looked like spaghetti, I think is the best
black spaghetti
approximation. It looked like black spaghetti, which you don't find at many restaurants, but you do find on the Threads throne. It was so just, really random directions for like non-variable stroke width path, and then the words Threads throne over and over again on it. Then did you ask about the whole throne?
Yeah, just the whole design of the whole thing.
Yeah, the whole thing. We knew that the threads had to be involved, but like random bands doesn't really make for a good chair, right? So like something like a design problem that we had to solve for this is how does that turn into a throne, which is typically a very like symmetrical and very like regal and orderly thing. So it's, this order versus disorder. How do we solve this? And we ended up with this look where we kind of have more or less just a regular throne. It's just those of you who can see it, it's the black parts. Those of you who can't, just a really, really high chair back, like that commands respect, right?
Yeah.
And then, nice arms on either side to kind of really fix you in position, feel very regal, king-like, queen-like. And then the random band aspect of it comes on the sides, and they just kind of flow in and out of the left and right side of the thing.
Yeah. And then as far as like working with the client, was a lot of back and forth when it came to the design, or how did that kind of work?
Yeah, there was definitely back and forth. I think what we landed on is something that they pitched further along in the design process. We had an initial one where the entire chair back was bands. It's just some bands were not spaghetti-like. They were a bit more, I guess, symmetrical and I guess like big, I don't know the word.
Big bands.
Bigger bands that were more orderly. And we just kind of, I don't know, iterated a few times and landed on this thing where it was more so, here's the chair, here's the bands. We're not really considering them together. They're different things working together.
Nice. And was this like still all in 2D and Illustrator? Did it jump to 3D at some point, or what was that kind of like?
There were 3D box made, but it's the throne itself is mostly planar, right? Like it's a cylinder at the bottom, but as far as the back, which is kind of where most of my involvement came in, the bands themselves don't really have any variable Z-space dimension. Neither does the chair back. So it was really just like drawing flat paths for a CNC machine to cut these things out. They get painted, they're good to go.
And then when it came time to like actually produce the throne, you talked to me a little bit about like CNC involvement. What was that kind of like?
I was not operating it, but I have to imagine that that's what the fabricators that we worked with used. Because we just sent them Illustrator files, and the paths were provided in those files. So I presume that they just kind of took some wood that would, hold up to somebody leaning back on it.
Yeah.
And got them cut out and painted.
Nice. And then there was graphics applied, right?
Yeah. So along with cut lines for the wood, we sent like the threads text. Those had to have been decals. I never saw it in person, so in some ways there's still mysteries to me as to how it all came together.
Nice. Well, what was like kind of your favorite part of the project or working on the project, this Threads Throne?
Just finding ways to solve the challenge of how do you turn branding for a social media platform into a chair. It's not obvious, right? Like, and like, that's just a really fun prompt, I think. Like, not one that you would ever really imagine would come up. So,
yeah. And especially for, such a new brand that's like in some ways, like still finding and establishing its brand identity. I mean, Threads has only been around for like 3 to 5 months, I think.
You're right, I think, but that's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Wow.
But cool. Thank you so much for coming on, and it's awesome to hear the design perspectives. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
And last but not least, rounding out our graphics duo, we have Katie Nehring. Katie, how's it going?
Yes. Great. How are you?
I am doing good. And so we are talking about the college football championship. And I know that you worked on the Meta project a little bit. What kind of were you working on for that?
I was working on the motion graphics for the social deliverables.
Yes, because take us a little rewind a little bit. It was a throne, right? And so what did the motion kind of involve in this whole project?
Yeah, so I took inspiration from the little noodles, we called them, on the throne with all the princess threads. So I took that and I just made that move. Trim paths and like have them come on and come off.
Of course, it's not as just simple as just making them move. Like, what was kind of the process around doing that? And then like, how did that end up with the live editors to like actually be able to turn it around?
Yeah, so I really liked how like in the throne, they were all kind of nestled together. So I wanted to emulate that with the motion graphic, have just a bunch of threads like kind of going on top of each other. So I animated that, and then I had a text box that had, the title or the question that they were asking. I had to make them into Mogarts, so then the editor could live edit without me having to be there and like export each like title A, title B. I don't have to be there. They can just export it themselves.
Were you still though kind of like on the clock in Denver while it was going down, or were you pretty hands off at that point?
I was hands off. Once I got them their MOVs for the title sequences, and then the Mogarts for every like typing question title sequence or question sequence, I was hands off.
Nice. And then, of course, we'll show it on the screen now, but for our audio only listeners, can you kind of describe like what roughly the animations were like?
Yeah. So for my very first thread, that was just a bunch of little noodles coming on the screen, and then a pop-up of the question, and then they like kind of noodled off. And then for royal reactions, it was this crown that popped up and kind of levitated, and a bunch of sparkles, and then some more noodles in the corner.
Nice.
Like yeah.
The noodles.
The noodles, yes.
Brandon called them spaghetti.
yes.
I'm very curious because I talked with Brandon about how they didn't have like necessarily a specific brand guidelines yet, but I would love to figure out what they are going to decide to call them internally, if they're going to just call them the noodles.
I love that. Yeah. No, like there was no brand book for this, so I kind of just, for my very first threads, I really just stuck with the threads thrown design, and then with royal reactions, I was like, well, I kind of want to make this more, interesting and not very corporate like. So I made something a little bit off brand for them, and they loved it. So it's very happy
what
about
was
that.
kind of was there much back and forth with you and the client when it came to animations, or were they like, sick?
They loved the very first version. So
Heck yes.
I was very happy about that. Brandon and I kind of went back and forth like, hey, like royal reactions isn't very like following their brand, but we both liked it. So we just decided to pitch it, and they took a chance on it. So it was
sick.
great.
And it turned out amazing. Awesome. So what was kind of if you think about it, like what was your favorite part from that whole project? What were you happy with?
I love the royal reactions. It was a lot of fun to do that.
Nice.
Just let my brain go wild and be like, okay, I want to do this. And then it worked out.
What does it kind of look like for you when you're like, I'm letting my brain go wild? Is that like, do you have kind of a process, or does it start in one way and end in another?
I start up on Pinterest and Behance, and I just look up just anything that like kind of makes me happy. And yeah, then I sketch some things out and I just make it.
Thank you so much for coming on, Katie.
Of course.
I really appreciate it. It's cool to hear the kind of graphic side to the projects, because we do so much stuff with graphics, but you never really get to like deep dive into it. So I'm very excited to have you on more in the future.
Yeah, of course.
And that brings us back to creator shoutouts, where each week we shout out a creator or creators that have truly been inspiring us. And joining us again to talk about a creator they like, Regan Alsup. Regan, hello again.
Hello.
What creator would you like to shout out today?
Today, I want to shout out Alex with Press Play Creative. He was our director of photography and editor on the ESPN shoot. And yeah, he does a lot of work in sports. I think he brought a really fun kind of vibe to the set. It was super fun working with him on the edit as well. He brought a lot of really awesome creativity. And so Alex with Press Play Creative.
Awesome. Well, shout out Alex. And I would love to shout out Makena Megson. Makena is the social or digital intern for the Colorado Avalanche, which we briefly met her when we did our Colorado Avalanche Media Day. But she has been killing it lately. She does a ton of photography for them in like warm-ups and kind of like from the bench, as well as she has been doing these both for the Avs and for her personal accounts, these like behind the scenes things, which I've been loving. They're so cool to see kind of like how that organization runs and how she is a part of it. But yeah, I just wanted to give her a little shout out. I'm sure she's crushing it now. And I'm sure as she like steps into full-fledged positions, she's going to crush it even more.
Love it.
Regan, thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, thanks to everyone that joined us today, Avalon, Katie, Brandon, and Audrey. But we have to end the episode as we always do. Regan, what do we say at the end of every episode?
It's a snake.
It's a snake. Thank you.